Well, good morning, and thank you so much, my dear friend. What a joy it is to be here with all of you today virtually. And I certainly hope that I can come visit you live and in person sometime soon. So, Big Dog saw a puppy chasing its tail, and he said, "Why are you chasing your tail?" And the puppy said, "I have studied philosophy and how the world works. I work hard to understand and solve all the problems that I see. And I've learned that the best thing any dog can have is happiness, and that happiness lives in my tail. That's why I chase it. And when I finally catch it, I will have happiness." Well, after a moment, the big dog said, "Son, I too have studied philosophy and how the world works. And when I was young, I too thought that happiness was found in my tail. In fact, I spent a lot of time chasing it. And then one day I discovered that wherever I went, whatever I did, my tail was always following behind me. And that's the day I realized it would always be with me. That's the day I stopped chasing it." So Reverend Larry asked me to talk about summer fun, those things that bring happiness and joy to us at this time of year. And while many of the things we do in the summer can be done any time of year, there's something about summer that just makes them even more delightful. What do you enjoy most in the summertime? Some of my favorite things are hearing kids laugh, going on vacation, going to the county fair, ice cream on a really hot day, and then, of course, playing in the water. And what I've learned is that the key to enjoying them anytime is being present, giving myself permission to really enjoy every moment and to see the good, to see the God in those moments. And to see those moments as opportunity for spiritual practice. Emma Curtis Hopkins says, "God is good and good is God." So my question to you is, are you recognizing the good in your life as an expression of God? Those joyful moments, do you see God in them? And if your answer is no, or not yet, or sometimes, why not make more of an effort? Why not recognize those moments and be grateful for them? Because that alone will bring about more. That's one of the very foundational principles of our teaching. The more you see, the more you see. There's this concept called numenosity, which according to Professor Google, means arousing spiritual or religious emotion, and it comes from the Latin word numen. It was given meaning by German theologian Rudolf Otto in his 1917 book, The Idea of the Holy. His writings influenced many, many others, Carl Jung and C.S. Lewis, just to name a few. And if you're like most people on the spiritual path, you've had some of those moments where you've had spiritual emotion. You've experienced oneness. You've experienced deep connection. And just like experiencing good, you want more, right? Well, this week I was inspired by the amazing photographs taken from the Webb telescope. You know that thing was launched 6 months ago? It took 20 years to build, and it cost $10 billion. It's 930,000 miles away, almost 1,000,000 miles from where you and I sit right now. And it's already shown us that there are more than 200 billion galaxies out there. In a few short months, it's expanded our idea of the universe. Maybe like the infinite intelligence that's behind this amazing universe, we're finally understanding that there are no limits. This project was a joint venture between NASA, the European Space Agency, and the Canadian Space Agency. Successful launch, positioning, and performance is something that people all around the world share, appreciate, and celebrate. I find it really exciting. Looking at those pictures just inspire my soul. They allow me to feel that expansiveness of spirit. And I bet that if you take a look at them, you'll feel that way as well. I also love how this experimenter, this project, seems to blend science, art, and creation. You see, there are those scientists with their geeky brains that thought all this into being. They get data to study, and that data will no doubt result in new scientific discoveries. The artsy people will be inspired by the beauty and the majesty of the photos being transmitted. And spiritual and religious folk will sit in awe of divine intelligence. These photos remind us of our divinity and the unlimited, infinite nature of God. It can prompt us to examine and let go of our limiting beliefs. There's a famous story about a man on a train who notices Pablo Picasso sitting next to him. He couldn't believe it. There he is, he thought, the master himself. So he turned to Picasso and he said, "Mr. Picasso, it's truly an honor to meet you. Your paintings are magnificent. But you know, they don't really offer a realistic interpretation of life. Why don't you make paintings that accurately depict what the world looks like?" Well, Picasso sat quietly and then said, "May I ask what you think reality looks like?" The man then reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and from his wallet took out a picture of his wife. "Well, like this," he said. "This is my wife." Picasso looked at the photograph, and after a moment he said, but she is very small and very flat too." You know, when we can let go of limiting beliefs, we can grow spiritually, and we all want that, right? Experiences of God and our interconnectedness can happen anywhere, anytime, any place, but they happen most often out in nature. And if you think about it, that would make sense, for as long as man has walked this earth, the presence of something more has been identified with nature. And throughout history, experiences of God have occurred in nature. I've had them, and I suspect you have too. And whether or not they fit the dictionary definition of numinous or not doesn't really matter. What matters is that the experience of God and the desire is created for more of it. So let me give you a personal example. It was 1996, and I was a brand new scuba diver. This was my dive number 12, and I was in Cozumel, Mexico. And up until that point, I was a little afraid and a little claustrophobic. Imagine that, being claustrophobic in the wide open ocean. I was still very much aware of my breathing and the gear and everything else I was supposed to remember, and still very much into the doing of diving. I hadn't yet gotten into the experience of being. Suddenly I looked up and I saw a beautiful eagle ray. It was swimming, no, it was flying through a beam of light right above me. And as I swam towards that light, I felt the warmth of the sun, but I felt something more than that. I was no longer afraid. Everything was different. The eagle ray circled above me and played a little in my bubbles. And then it stopped and it looked at me, floating right there. It was almost as if it were saying, "I see you. I really see you." And then it began to glide away. All of that felt so magical to me. And I remember noticing that the colors looked brighter and they permeated my being. There was a depth to it, and it seemed endless. I no longer felt that I was in the water. Instead, I was the water, and I knew it. I wasn't watching a ray or a fish or coral. I was the ray. I was the fish. I was the coral. I knew that I was the whole ocean, and the vastness of that filled my senses completely. Perception of time disappeared, and eternity seemed to be encompassed in that very moment. It was the most profound experience of oneness I had ever had. And while I've never had that exact experience again, today, with over 250 dives logged, I still feel a deep sense of awe and wonder as I descend into the deep. When my head goes beneath the surface and I'm completely surrounded by water, I remember that feeling of unity. And just remembering it brings me closer to my own reality. I absolutely feel connected with the divine each and every time I dive. It's become a spiritual experience. And I never cease to be amazed by the magnificence, the incredible beauty, the vastness, and the diversity of spirit and how it shows up in the world. That experience changed the way I perceived God. It was so very intimate and the most incredible feeling of being love that I had ever had. It truly took the ideas that I had studied for so long from my head into my heart. I knew that my relationship with God was a love affair and that it was only beginning. The experience is beyond words. And when I think about it, I think about the line from the Upanishads, "Thou art that." In Richer Living, Ernest Holmes said, "I believe it was Plato who said that God is love, truth, and beauty. It's always seemed wonderful to me that one of the world's greatest thinkers should have included beauty as a necessary part of the divine. How evident this beauty is everywhere we look. How wonderful is the landscape, the sunset, or the color of desert at dawn. How beautiful is the daffodil in its sweet simplicity. And what majestic beauty and strength in the mountain and the wave. Everything is rooted in beauty. Beauty is harmony and right proportion. It is symmetry and charm and grace and loveliness. Surely we should all identify ourselves with this terrific beauty. It pours its warmth and color over everything, and it seems to be at the very root of our being." Human beings have always been drawn to beauty and the majesty of nature, maybe in part because it invites us to look deeper. So that, as Ernest Holmes says, we can identify ourselves with it and feel a deep connection with it. Sometimes it might feel, though, that God is playing hide and seek with us, hiding behind a tree or under a rock or on the other side of a difficult situation. The truth is, God is simply there in the beauty and grace, waiting for us to discover the one in all. May all of us practice enough to be able to give up that game of hide and seek and only find. So I live near the beach and I like to walk there in the early morning. And often I stand at the water's edge and just breathe in those negative ions, feeling the power of the ebb and the flow of the tide. I never walk away without being reminded of what's really going on. That no matter what's happening in my life, God's got this. And I just need to go with the flow. Well, if you're like me, you probably hear that phrase and you think of the late 60s. And while that decade might seem to hold claim to it, the phrase actually comes from Roman emperor and philosopher Marcus Aurelius, who ruled Rome from 161 to 180 AD. In his writings called the Meditations, he penned a lot about the flow of happiness and how our thoughts create our experience. And he surmised that good things flow naturally if we let them, and that it was better to go with the flow than try to resist change. There's a rhythm to life. The sun and moon rising and setting, the seasons of our life and the seasons of a year, the ebb and flow of the tide. You see, the water comes in like an inhale and the water flows out like an exhale. It's nature telling us to go with the flow. And what happens when we try to stop it? When we resist? When we push against it? Well, life gets hard, right? There's something to be said about that. Pay attention. Life isn't supposed to be hard. In Byron Katie's book, Loving What Is, she says, when you argue with reality, you lose, but only 100% of the time. If you're like me and you love water, especially in the summertime, I invite you to consider the life of water. It can be a metaphor for the journey of life. But water begins its time here as it falls from the sky or melts from ice. It travels down a mountain or tributary or stream in the same way we come into the world and we begin our lives on earth. And like a river flows within the confines of its banks, we are born with certain defining characteristics that govern our identity. We're born in a specific place and time, with a specific family, and with certain gifts and challenges. And within those parameters, we move through life, encountering many twists and turns and obstacles along the way, just as a river does. And when a river breaks at a waterfall, it gains energy and it moves on. It doesn't hang around, it keeps moving. As we encounter our own waterfalls or challenges in life, we might fall hard, but we always keep moving on. Water can inspire us not to be rigid with fear or cling to what's familiar. It's brave and it doesn't waste time clinging to the past. It flows onward without ever looking back. Eventually, the river empties into the sea. It graciously joins with that something larger without any resistance. It doesn't fear a loss of identity or control. It just joins together in oneness with that vastness of the ocean. Every time we move beyond our individual egos and remember that we're part of something bigger, we become more like water and go with the flow. And like the ocean, there are times of stillness and times when it storms. The flow of life may very well take us to places we'd rather not be, and as tempting as it can be to resist, riding the wave takes a lot less effort. It makes life easier, and it can be a lot more fun. If you like surfing or boogie boarding, you know what I mean. That good moves through us. It's a circle with no beginning and no end. It flows. And when we live in that flow, we invite more good into our lives. So I have one more story for you. Some time ago, an eager young doctor took an assignment at an infrequently used clinic in a rural community. It was one of those close-knit little towns where everybody knows everybody. And since the families had been there for generations, there seemed to be a comfort in the way things were and had always been. It was clear that the elders, the grandparents, and the great-grandparents were respected and appreciated for their wisdom and experience. There hadn't been a doctor in that clinic for over 2 years, and the traveling nurse rarely saw anyone when she showed up. So when the new doctor arrived, everyone wanted an appointment. Some just wanted checkups. Others had pressing medical needs. So he spent the first couple of months thinking about what he needed to do to support the people of this town. He was developing an appreciation for the good folks of this tiny community. When things began to settle down, he started going through the clinic records, matching faces to names and files, and he realized that he had seen everyone in town except Maxine. Well, according to the file, Maxine now would be 99 years old. It said that she had 13 kids, 33 grandkids, and 56 great-grandkids. And he had heard a lot about her. She was like a legend. Everyone looked up to Maxine. And since she hadn't come to the clinic, the doctor decided he was going to pay her a visit. When he got to her home, he was greeted warmly and invited in for tea. He told Maxine who he was and asked if she had any medical concerns. He wanted to be sure that Maxine knew he was there for her if she needed anything. Well, Maxine thanked him for stopping by, but instead of answering his questions, she artfully engaged him in a conversation about his life and his work. And at last, when she seemed satisfied that he was the real deal, Maxine smiled, thought for a moment, scratched her knee and adjusted her wig and said, "I'm guessing, Doc, that you're a hard worker. The fact is, I've not had too many medical problems over the years, so right now I can't think of anything that you can do for me." Well, he looked quite solemn, but after a brief pause, looking at his serious face, she smiled softly and said, "You know, truth be told, there is something that you can maybe do for me. I might be 99, and I'm not as steady or quick on my feet as I used to be, but I still love to dance. Would you dance with me? She asked. The young doctor blushed a little, and then he admitted to Maxine that he wasn't much of a dancer. I never really learned, he told her. You think maybe you could teach me? Well, Maxine seemed pleased. Well, she said, that depends. Can you hear the music? So my question to you is, are you in tune with the rhythm of life? Can you hear the music? The invitation this week is to keep enjoying your summer. Make a conscious effort to look for God's fingerprints and celebrate that. Can you hear the music? Let's pray. So as I quiet my mind and move into that sacred place within, that garden of the heart, I listen for the music. I feel and know and sense that presence of God everywhere, in everything, in everyone, in every experience. I know that it lives and loves through me. And as I walk this earth, I walk as that presence of God, as that presence of love, and I see it reflected back to me everywhere I look. And just as I know this for myself, I know this for each person here. Each person is a living expression of that infinite spirit of love. And I know that each person brings this spiritual practice more into their life, allowing it to become more alive in them, looking out into the world and seeing God, seeing those fingerprints, feeling and knowing that every experience is an expression of the divine. Having those moments of oneness and feeling that infinite love. And so with a heart so full of gratitude and appreciation, I release my word to that law of mind. I call it good because I know that it is. And so it is. Amen.